What's up, guys? Ronin Man here. Hey, remember back when you were a kid and your imagination was going crazy? You were thinking of something. You were like in a tree house. You were imagining this, or you were looking at something like a railroad track, and you were imagining how the thing was made, or how you could make something better. Or you looked at your bicycle and you imagined a better chain or some kind of. Now, maybe the idea that you had at the time as a child was not a good idea because of some other limitations. Okay, you probably didn't patent some new technology when you're 5 years old, although I'm sure somebody in history has. Exercise in imagination is a very important thing. I believe that creation, or essentially what you make in your life, it starts with imagination. And in order to have imagination, you need to be safe and comfortable. So there's certain things that you need, right? There's imagine Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? I doubt you would have the ability to imagine some new technology, while you are on the run in a war, right? For example, or being attacked by a tiger, right? I'm sure somebody could do it, but basically, you need that kind of security. You need food. There's going to be food tonight. And then you're sitting there thinking hey, I wonder, how I could improve my bicycle. Or I wonder how, why do adults do it this way? They could do it that way, would be better. And I think cultivating your imagination as a man is a very, very important thing. Really super important. And a lot of adults, I think, lose that ability to imagine things. And to me, this is fucking sad, man. It's so sad because, you can create new things up into your 80s and 90s. You can patent things. You can create new ideas. Your imagination and your ability to create, both in your life and also, for business or for others, is something that is a muscle that inherently makes you happy, I believe, as a man. I really do. I think this is one of the fundamental aspects of a man. One of the fundamental keys, and what shuts it down is that a lot of men, as they when they're boys, they're thinking, of maybe imagining some kind of amazing, how they could make a flying saucer or something, right? And then then they get shamed, or maybe they don't have. If you didn't have such a creative parent, or if you, for whatever reason, were in a situation where your imagination was not appreciated, was not cultivated, it's very easy to shut that down. It's one of the easiest things to shut down because I would have to say it inherently looks embarrassing, right? It's because a man, let's say a very rigid man with a rigid sense of self, is afraid. He's afraid of being wrong. He's afraid of looking bad. And so he's never going to say anything he's not sure of. And this type of man also tends to do the same thing every day. So he eats the same food. He wakes up at the same time. He does the same thing. And that's because he is. Well, I mean, there's habits, and there's good habits where you eat vegetables and you buy vegetables. There's good habits, and it's obviously complicated, but essentially, when you are afraid of being wrong, you are not going to venture into the risk of imagining things, because when you imagine things, the art of creation, the art of brainstorming, this is what we did. I think we did a lot of this at the MGTOW World Summit, was people would bring up an idea, and then we would come up with solutions. And that's a form of imagination. It's a creation. It's maybe you could do this, or what if this happened, or have you thought of this, or what if you did this, then that would happen, and this could happen. If you save some money here and you put it there. And we were all what if you moved here? What if you did this? What if you told this? What if you thought this? What if you wrote this? What if you created this? What if you formed this kind of friendship? What if you made this alteration in your life? Then maybe this could happen. And then, and that kind of thing, right? So we were creating. We were, there was a great book. There's an absolutely fantastic book called When Ideas Have Sex. And you don't even have to read it. It's a great book. But the idea is that when two people talk, new ideas basically are born. So one person has one idea, and then the other person looks at the idea and maybe thinks of some weakness in the idea that might need some protection. Maybe, for example, obviously the original cars, right? Somebody thought of a car, then somebody said, well, what if that car, how heavy is a car, weighs thousands of pounds? What if it hits another car? Then it's going to be destroyed. So the guy said, oh, well, let's put a bumper, let's put something on the front to protect it, right? And so that's the art of creation. Like one guy thinks of one thing, the other guy thinks of a weakness, then he thinks of a way, someone else thinks of a way to protect from that weakness, and then that and it goes on and on and on, and eventually technology moves forward, and you go from a very simple idea to an incredibly complex idea. And I think this is one thing as men in modern society is we look at everything and everything is so complex. Quantum physics, quantum technology, quantum computing, this is like one of the latest very important technologies that is actually moving forward pretty quickly. Biotechnology, even the manufacture, like for example, of silicon chips has become down to 7 nanometers. Is so small, right? It's just incredible. The size of the precision that manufacturing is required in that manufacturing. Even Intel is having difficulty mastering it, right? Apple's done it, Huawei's done it. There's a couple of companies that have made, I think AMD, did a 7 nanometer. Either way, it's happening, and Intel's working on a 10 nanometer, and even that is just so incredibly small. And so these type of things can make a man, or especially a boy, really feel like, there's nothing else to invent, or just overwhelming, it's too much, or the world's too advanced. Like every time he has an idea, it's squashed down, or it's like ridiculed or made fun of because, and it has obvious holes in it, right? So if you want to create things, okay, if you want to make a business, if you want to do anything that requires creativity, which I believe every man should be doing, because this is a fundamentally optimistic and positive step for men. And it's just like when this is shut down, it's like unnatural and fucked up, like very bad. A man should be optimistic. He should be able to, the muscle to create should be taut and ready, where he sees things and he thinks about them. There was this story I heard, and I can't remember who it was. I can't remember. Was it Bettina Ardent? Either way, she was saying that. No, it was somebody else. Either way, what she was saying was when her mom was young. Okay, so this was like her. She's old, right? She's like in her 60s or 70s. Her mom has passed away, but her mom, when she was young, she told her that, and she was in Italy. Men and women. This is before modern society. We're talking 130 years ago. That men and women live very different lives, and the men and women's actual lives did not intersect anywhere near what they do now. But which is interesting, very interesting. And so the men had their life and the women had theirs. There was the women's and the men's. They got together when they were eating, and she was watching the women washing. And it's 130 years ago, and just a story from Italy. And they were like singing and enjoying washing, and the men were, I don't know, out in the fields or whatever. And then they came together for dinner, and the dinner ended, and when the women were talking and just talking about people and things and this and that, the men all went outside, and she was a young girl, so she was quite interested in things, and she was watching the men, she was watching the women, and then the men went outside, and she couldn't understand what they were doing, but they all went outside and they opened up the hood of the truck, the engine, and they all looked at the truck engine, and then the men all were sitting there going, I don't know, if you did this, you'd make it better, like this here is very strong, but it has a weakness there. And the men were looking at the engine and enjoying themselves and thinking of ways that the engine could be improved and what's wrong with it, what do they do right, essentially using their imagination. And she was like, this was not work, guys. They didn't work at car companies. These guys, they were just regular men, and they were just like, this is what men were doing for entertainment, essentially. Like they were laughing and smoking after eating a nice meal, you want to do something, and then this is what they were doing. And she was like, whoa, like, she was like, men and women are very different, like, and I think that's true. And I think there's also very masculine women and feminine men, and that's all good too. I think that there's a place for both, essentially. That is nature. We have flowers, we have earthquakes, we have comets, we have gravity, we have black holes, we have water, we have gases. This is all part of the world that we live in. So there is no good or bad, like gases are bad and rocks are great. Everything is part of our natural world. And these are just aspects of humanity. And I believe that men, it's mainly men listening to this channel. I think that don't let yourself be shamed into not having imagination. So because, for example, I did a podcast earlier and I talked about quantum physics, and somebody said, was actually a cool comment, but they said, you got the physics wrong, or you were wrong on one part or whatever, but I'll see you at the summit and we'll correct you. And he never said anything. I don't even remember who it was, because everybody uses a different name online, username, as they are their real name. So I don't even know who it was, but my first instinct was kind of like, oh shit, I said something wrong. I made a mistake, and so the fear, I think that this is the kind of thing that stops men from having imagination, because, like really seriously, like you can't be an expert in everything, right? You have a certain job, and that there's a very small niche. You might be whatever your job is, right? You might be an engineer, electrical engineer, or environmental engineer, or you might be a salesman or whatever, accountant. And that doesn't, I think that you can't, that's not enough for me, right? Like I want to go beyond that, like whatever my expertise is. I always want to, and also I want to try new things all the time too, because I get bored. I start a company, and then, after I get really good at it, I get bored and I want to try something else, because I think this is what the fucking man is, right? We just have this insatiable desire to master our universe, to master ourselves, to create. And I think that it's very bad if you squash your ability to create and imagine. Should never lose that, because you have the capacity. You have the capacity to create something, to invent something, to discover something, like a Galileo, like a Newton. You absolutely do. Everything has not been discovered. We will have discoveries that will just blow your mind in the next couple of years. And in fact, information and discoveries and science is moving forward even faster than ever before. And also, to give you some more kind of motivation to think this way, is that if you just look historically at things, if you just look at inventions, just look where they came from. If you read anything about inventions, it's very interesting, because a lot of the times, and now this is not all the time, and people, you can exaggerate this, but still, a lot of the times, inventions come from somebody this is not their field. They're from another field. So they might be a salesman, and they're looking at the product they're selling, and they're like, why does it have this thing? Like, customers are always complaining about that. It should be that way, And then he tells the engineers, like, hey, guys, like, why don't you do it this way, because this might work better. And then the engineers, what often happens, what do, right? They say, you're your salesman, get the fuck out of here, right? Go sell something, get out of here, And this is like very tempting to do, actually, because especially for people with a weak sense of self, lacking in depth, envious, lacking in talent. This is a very 3-inch, as you saw in my video. Don't be a 3-incher, don't be an insecure male, right? This is one thing that guys have that women don't have. It's this kind of insecurity. And I tell you, one of the most important things you can do as a man is to overcome this internal insecurity and allow other people to be right. Allow other ideas to infiltrate your mind and allow yourself to be wrong. Allow yourself to venture out and take a chance and say, to say something like, hey, what if this happened and this happened and that happened? Like, holy moly, like this could actually work, and then also to realize that your idea will probably not work. But that's not the point. The point is that, well, obviously it could work. Okay, that could be part of the point too. You might invent, tomorrow you could discover some new element in the element chart, or you could find a new way to keep birds from going into the engines of jets, which is something I've thought about a lot. There's billions of dollars lost every year just in the United States alone on birds going into jet engines, and very expensive and very difficult. They've tried a lot of things, but if you can find a way to keep birds out of jet engines, you will be so rich, like overnight, because it's a huge, and you can patent that sucker. And I think about these things. I think like I have a few things in the back burner for my own mind. One of them is how to keep birds out of jet engines. And there's a few more, but actually there's a lot more in my mind. And so I wanted to come up with what I saw today and what I think is happening. So my imagination. Now, I could be definitely wrong, and this podcast is not to say that my idea is correct. It's just like an assumption or a vision or a imagination that I had this morning. So I wanted to share that and see if you had something that you were thinking about like this, and see if this would give you any motivation or some commentary here on this. So I'm very interested in electric cars. I think electric cars. I've been interested in electric cars. I've been reading about electric cars since they, like, a long time ago. So I've been it's something that I've just been fascinated with, because I can imagine, like, I remember in my mind, I imagined, what if my phone, or my computer, my laptop, what if it was powered by a diesel engine? So, I had to, every time I turn on my phone, I had to like start this diesel engine, and then there was like diesel smoke coming out of my phone, or there was diesel smoke coming out of my laptop in my house. That would be really bad for the air inside the house, right? And so I always thought to myself, geez, that's true. Like, people die all the time in cars because they're, lovers are in cars, they're kissing, and they have the engine running, they have the heater on and the air conditioner on, and they die because of the carbon monoxide that rises up. Now, today it's a lot less than it was when I was a kid, because cars are better insulated. But still, it happens. People still die of carbon monoxide poisoning all the time. And so I thought, okay, you don't want an internal combustion engine inside a house, right? And then I thought, well, do you want it outside? Hell no, I don't want it outside. I don't want like this thing. When it's running, like a car's running, say near your, like they say there's an overhang at your house, and there's like a car running there. The air gets pretty bad, right? It gets pretty bad. Like it's evil, right? And especially if it's a diesel. But if it's even a gas car, if it's running and the air is not circulating and it's just like accumulating, man, that gets pretty bad, right? So I thought to myself, years ago, I thought that was a vision I had of I imagined just diesel smoke coming out of my phone. And I thought, oh, that's bad. I wouldn't want that. I like the battery because I can charge it with electricity from a plant that's far, far out of town, and that's obviously not nearly as polluting as a little diesel engine is, right? It's easier to put pollution control devices on a large, stable, in one location factory than it is on a moving. It's more difficult to perform chemical experiments on a rocket than it is in a building, right? Because it's moving, right? You need batteries and you need stability, and it's easier, right? So you can make electricity in a stable building somewhere, and you can also make it at scale easier than you can have these little engines running around. It's difficult to put pollution controls on a car, right? That's always the trade-off, right? Balance of weight and then protection, right? Whereas in let's say a coal plant, You can have heavy equipment to filter the air. It's easy, right? It's not on wheels. It's not moving around. It's one stable location. So I thought to myself, geez, I wouldn't want diesel running my lamp or my fan or something in my house. Hell no. I thought I want a battery, right? Or I want electricity, And so I thought, cars too, right? I love driving, and I love, I really had an attachment to motors when I was young. But as electric cars came out, I thought that's a very interesting technology. And again, I want to separate it from politics. I want to almost separate it from reality in some ways. Your imagination, your ability to create, sometimes requires you to rise above social issues, where you can just think about things a little bit detached, where you can kind of like give yourself the space that you can create. Sometimes if you're too realistic, sometimes that doesn't help. That like stops you, because you can't see the big picture. You're just seeing the small things, like in this small area. Sometimes you can change things, and like there's bigger things that are possible. So you have to let your imagination, like a wild horse, run wild for a while. And then after you've kind of, got a new lay of the land, you've got a new idea, then you start to test it out for practicalities, or, what could be changed in the environment that would make this practical, or whatever, to go and get it into more closer to reality. But when you're starting an idea, you have to start with this kind of like, almost like a kid, like, well, what if I had a flying saucer, right? You know what I mean? That kind of, that starting point is a good starting point. So this morning I was reading the news, and Tesla bought a company called Maxwell, I think. But either way, it's an ultracapacitor company. And ultracapacitor. So what is it? What is a capacitor? Now, again, here's where I'm going to use my, you know what I mean? Like you're going to see if you're an expert in this area in batteries or ultracapacitors, you're going to see my lack of knowledge. But at the same time, I have a pretty good grip on things as a standard guy, and you have to have faith in yourself. You got to have faith in yourself, guys. You have the capacity to create something great, okay? So fuck anybody who tells you don't. And very likely, the thing that you're going to invent, create, make, dream up, perfect, is going to be something that you shouldn't be doing. Something that doesn't fit your profession, right? You might write a book, and there's so many examples of this. People that came up with something, they wrote a book completely outside of their profession, and it was a popular book, right? So you have the right to have an imagination. You have the fucking right, and not just the right, but you are an intelligent, creative individual. And because of that, you could do something great. You have to know that. You are a man. You have almost infinite imagination and capacity to create. So let that run. So I'm going to let mine run for a little bit. And, this was my idea this morning. So Tesla bought a capacitor company, ultracapacitor company called Maxwell. Now, this company, they obviously have manufacturing techniques. They have capacitors, battery technique, battery technology. It's possible that they bought the company for another reason than the ultracapacitors. But I think, my impression is they bought it for the ultracapacitors, first and foremost. Now, because it's an ultracapacitor company. Now, Elon Musk, I think he was getting a PhD. Either way, he was studying ultracapacitors. And ultracapacitors, I don't know that much about them, but I know that I had a very high-end stereo. I had I spent a lot of money on stereos when I was young, because I worked in a stereo store. I sold electronics when I was in university. And so I got very interested in electronics, and I bought a lot of very high-end handmade electronics. So I bought tube preamplifiers. I'm an audiophile. I'm a real audiophile. I love music. I love sounds. I like accurate sounds. I like studio speakers, without that boom boom bass and the ch-ch-ch. I like the accurate. I like to hear a piano played exactly like a piano sounds. I like to hear a snare drum exactly the way a snare drum sounds. I want a bass exactly the same amount that in real life the bass would be. And that's what a good speaker is. The better the speaker is, the more accurate it is, the more it sounds like it's supposed to sound. And if you don't like the sound, that means you're not recording well enough, right? So that's where you have to start to have, when you buy an expensive stereo, or you buy, let's say not expensive, but you buy high quality speakers, high quality amplifier, you suddenly realize the limitations of either the medium, like a CD, or MP3, or tape or record or whatever that you have, and you can hear it better. And so it's a double-edged sword, because when you have a very high-end audio, when you're an audiophile, you suddenly can hear your albums from a very different perspective, because you can hear that they didn't do a good job recording. And on my stereo, I could hear even weird things, like sometimes I could hear even people's voices in the background of a commercially available CD, because it was such an accurate stereo that you could actually hear background stuff, people breathing and things like that. Not very often. It's not very often that something like that would be in there, but you could definitely hear very clearly which album was recorded well and not well. And so what happens when you were an audiophile is you quickly start throwing away your terribly recorded stuff. Even if it's a band that you love, if they're not recorded well, you're like, yeah, I'll listen in my car. I'm not gonna listen at home, because you have this very accurate stereo. So long way to say that I had a amplifier, very expensive amplifier, made by a company called Electron Kinetics, and John Iverson was the designer, who disappeared in some weird circumstance. Obviously was murdered a long time ago, and after he made my amp. And this amp was so powerful that one of these amps was powering all of the speakers at Disneyland. That was what I heard from one of the Imagineers at the time, the people that run the audio inside the electronics in Disneyland, one of my friends. And I had this amplifier, and it was so powerful, and it had this massive black, huge, heavy thing inside of it. And I asked my friend, I said, what is that, And he said, that's a capacitor. I said, okay. I said, well, what's that do? Why, when I was buying it, when I was looking at it, I'm like, why is that so important? Why is it so big? It looks huge, and it's like heavy, And then he said, well, okay, that's a good question. He said, what the capacitor does is, imagine electricity is like water. So imagine water rushes in and fills that capacitor. Now, a capacitor can fill up with water electricity very quickly, almost instantly. So, and then what it does is it's kind of like imagine a storage. You have a bucket that stores electricity. Okay. Now, when a note happens on the stereo, okay, so let's say a bass note. A bass note requires to accurately represent a deep bass note. It's several hundred feet long, an accurate bass note. It's like huge. The bass note, that's why you can't have a bass note accurately represented in a small room. You need a certain size room in order for that bass note to fully be realized, right? So in a nice stereo, with a nice stereo, the room becomes very important. The acoustics of the room become important. It's not just the recording and the stereo, the amplifier, the speakers, everything becomes important, because you need to recreate that bass note. You need space, right? So, but that long bass note cannot be recreated by a tiny capacitor. So my capacitor in my amp was, let's say it was, I don't remember how tall exactly, but let's say it was 8 inches, right? And it was by, let's say, 6 inches. And it was this huge, heavy thing, right? Might have even been 10 inches tall. And by 10 inches wide, it was huge, right? It was massive in the Eagle 7A amps. It was a fucking massive, right? So imagine that this capacitor, what it does is it fills up with electricity and then it discharges. So when you have a huge capacitor like that, okay, and then when a bass note happens, when it goes boom, it is, imagine the level of electricity goes doo, down. So it comes down like, let's say, a third of the capacitor for a huge bass note. And then there's another bass note. And then it's like, boom. And it goes down another third, right? Now, obviously, it wouldn't go down a third because this capacitor is so massive that you could handle like boom, boom. You could hit all these deep notes, one after the other. But the notes are so quickly that there's not enough time for the capacitor to refill. So in a good amplifier, it has a capacitor that has the capacity to store enough electricity to hit those bass notes, hit those notes accurately. Okay, in an inefficient speaker, because most high-quality speakers are very inefficient, they need a lot of power, okay, to accurately represent stuff. Generally, there are accurate studio speakers also, like the JBL 1412s, but most of them are not very efficient. That's one of the problems with high-end speakers. They tend to be very inefficient. And so you need that big amplifier to power them. So inside that amplifier, you need that capacitor, that huge fucking capacitor, right? And so what's an ultracapacitor? It's a form of that. It's a form of a capacitor. So what is a capacitor? A capacitor fills up with energy quickly. It stores energy, but it doesn't store it for the long term like a battery. It's not exactly like a battery. Okay, it kind of dissipates over time. Now, my amplifier, I could turn the thing off, and I could play music at full volume for almost 15 minutes before the music would stop, because there was so much power in my capacitor. There was so much excess power in my capacitor. I could actually I could unplug the amp and still be playing music for like over 10 minutes. And I mean like really playing music, because the capacitor was so huge, stored so much energy. It was amazing, right? So it is something like a battery, a capacitor, but it's a little different because it quickly charges and it dissipates fairly quickly. And I know that it also just kind of loses power naturally. It just kind of leaks out, right? So the ultracapacitors, I know, are kind of the holy grail for cars because, I know this from reading previously, like ultracapacitors, people have been working on ways to make these instead of batteries for cars, because you could obviously charge them up instantly. And so theoretically, an ultracapacitor could fill up faster than a gasoline tank, much faster, right? Almost instantly. So that's kind of the holy grail. But I thought, okay, this is it. Now here's my this morning, my imagination. I said, okay, Elon Musk bought invested $200 million in this economy, okay? In this environment, it's not a Tesla's under the microscope, spends money, it's like definitely going to be watched. It's going to affect the stock price and the future of the company for an ultracapacitor company. Now, probably, so this is where I my imagination, that could be wrong, right? This whole idea I have, okay, this whole podcast today could end up being completely wrong, and I don't care. Now, I think it's going to be right, obviously. That's why I'm thinking it right now. I'm planning it, because I've been right a lot and I've been wrong a lot. But I have faith in my imagination because I work it out like a muscle. And the more you work out your imagination, one, it will give you enormous satisfaction as a man. It really is. It's very fucking enjoyable, And also, you will create things because other men are afraid of making mistakes. They're afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being shamed. Like, oh, you're not an engineer, you idiot. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. This is what, even if someone doesn't say that, that's how you feel. A lot of guys feel. Okay, so I think to succeed in business, to succeed in your life, it requires taming those natural fears or overcoming those natural weaknesses that you have as a human being. And so one of them is the shame that you have for being wrong. You have to kind of get over that over time. And of course, you want to study so that there's less likelihood of being wrong. You want to improve your mind. You want to increase your intelligence all the time. And you want to have a more fertile mind that has synapses that are firing accurately. And you want to have a neural network. As your brain gets older, the connections increase. And that's why an older brain often is very creative because you've already thought different ways. Each one of those is a connection that you formed in your brain. And that allows an older brain, this is under MRI scans, to solve problems easier than a younger brain. A younger brain has to go through all the thinking to come up with the answer. An older brain has already connected all those things in its mind, and the brain can more quickly come to a conclusion. That's why wisdom. That's why when you get older, you might see things that a younger person couldn't see. So you know, a younger person might say, "Oh, you know, if you do this, it'd be great," and then the older person could say, "Well, you know, that might happen, but this also could happen, and this could, you know." So I think the balance here is that your brain, as you get older, and the longer that you allow yourself to have this optimism and create those things and study, you want to study things. Like I've studied so much stuff to get to this point of this podcast, of this particular insight or what do you call it? It's a theory. It's a proposition I'm making here, why he bought this company and what it could do in the future, and I think it's quite exciting. Actually, my conclusion you might like, but it's yeah, okay. So let's go back to I think here's what I think is happening. One, Tesla bought Maxwell for the ultracapacitor, and I can't imagine they bought it for the other reasons because it's a lot of money. And it's a difficult environment. It's not a good time for him to be investing $200 million in something foolish. When he bought Solar City, that affected the stock price a lot. If people's faith in him was down, he hasn't produced any cells yet. I don't think he wants to do it again. I'm guessing that it wasn't for some small reason. It was for some home run type idea. And he studied ultracapacitors, so he knows them, right? So an ultracapacitor is just a capacitor on steroids. It's a future, more advanced capacitor. And so what I think is, here's what I think, is they've been working on ultracapacitor for a long time. Elon Musk is an expert on them. He knows them. He studied them in school. That was his specialty. I think they're getting close to being ready. And not in the sense that my brain, what I thought before. I thought that ultracapacitors were going to replace batteries. Okay, so like we were going to use batteries, and then there was going to be an ultracapacitor company that would make a better storage mechanism, and it would bankrupt, for example, any company using batteries. So my thinking until today is that Tesla is at risk because they're not an ultracapacitor company, and so that there would be another company who would make, like Fisker, who just moved, I think, to Singapore. Either way, Fisker cars. Or maybe that was the British inventor who moved his electric car company. Dyson moved to Singapore. Either way, I thought that maybe what would happen is, like in today's rough and tumble environment, that you would have like a company like Tesla would like make batteries, and then they would take market share from BMW, Mercedes, and then some gasoline cars would go bankrupt, and then somebody else would make an ultracapacitor, which would be 10 million times better than a battery because it's instant charging essentially, and that it would just bankrupt Tesla, and they wouldn't sell it to Tesla because they'd want to have their own battery car company, and then it would be this rough and tumble, which still might happen. But I had this insight today, is that what I think is going to happen is that, and I think it's very important that you not only have imagination, but that you publicly state your theories and your predictions. This is another thing. I think it's important what I'm doing right now, because it's okay to be wrong. For one, you're going to be wrong most of the time in life. If you were right even 50% of the time, you would be a billionaire in foreign exchange. So anybody unless they're a trillionaire, billionaire, multi-billionaire, they're not right over 50% of the time. Okay? Period. They are not. Okay? You are not. We all are not. But that doesn't make this not valuable. So here's my insight this morning. I thought, okay, probably what they're doing is ultracapacitors they're improving. So imagine you have two buckets, chemical barrels, okay? Now, one of them is a battery, and the other one is an ultracapacitor in the same car, okay? And the ultracapacitor charges up almost instantly, okay? And so you plug it into the wall, you plug it into the supercharger. The ultracapacitor, one of the chemical barrels, imagine in your imagination, right? A glass of water, whatever helps you to think of it. One of them totally fills up. Then you unplug it and drive away. So essentially, in a few seconds, you charge up one of the barrels. Now, that barrel starts to send electricity over to the battery immediately. And then the battery discharges, the battery runs the motors. Okay, so you have the ultracapacitor filling, full of energy, absolutely full, just vibrant with energy. It's sending over the battery, and the battery's running the motors. Now, so that essentially what you're going to make is a hybrid. So you'll have ultracapacitor with the battery together, half and half, essentially. And one will charge quickly, the other ones, it will store things better. So my thinking is, I'm guessing that what he's doing is he bought the ultracapacitor company because it was ready, timing was right, but it wasn't ready, or it wasn't ready to replace batteries, but it was ready to augment batteries. So kind of like a hybrid, like a Toyota Prius. They have an electric motor, okay, and when you brake, it charges the battery. Okay, you don't plug it in a Prius in. A Prius gets its energy from braking and from slowing down. So you don't use the brake much on a Prius, because when you're slowing down, the natural, I don't know what you call it, but either way, the car slowing down is charging the battery at that same time. Okay, so it's a hybrid, it's a mix, it's together. And this is what I'm thinking, is there's probably a hybrid ultracapacitor battery that Musk is thinking. And maybe even it goes this far. Maybe there's two purposes. So let's say you have the battery and the ultracapacitor. The ultracapacitor charges instantly, starts to charge the battery. You drive away, boom, faster than gas. Boom, you're out of there, right? Gas station, charge, out, right? Not even time to get a cup of coffee. Then you're starting to charge the battery. But let's say that you have a heavy car, or a Tesla Semi, or you have you're drag racing, you have need for like incredible power. Let's say that you're pulling a trailer up a huge hill. Maybe not right away, but not only could the ultracapacitor serve as an instant storage for the battery and start to fill the battery, but it could also work as like a, what do you call it? Like a reserve. Like a reserve power. So like my capacitor for my base, it had extra, juice in it. Now he wasn't running a car, so it just needed to replace nodes, so it's plugged into the wall. But in a car, so the capacitor could like boom. You could take like a third or a fourth or whatever of that energy from the capacitor and not use it to charge a battery, but as a supplement to the power to the wheels. So the ultracapacitor could have like it could increase the power of the car enormously and make it much faster when you're drag racing or a semi pulling a heavy load up a hill, in addition to instant charging. Essentially, instant charging in. And then obviously if you had an ultracapacitor, what you could do is overnight you could charge your battery, okay? Then you charge the ultracapacitor, boom, whoosh, a couple seconds, and then you could use the ultracapacitor first for juice, and then you could use the battery. And then that way you could charge the ultracapacitor anytime you want, very quickly. So that's my imagination. That's my idea of why Tesla bought Maxwell. So there you go. I think, that was just my idea this morning. Boom, I'm done. And as you go through your life, as you wander around and look at things, I would really recommend you to think, like I always think, of how things could be better. I'll always think, like, if the plot of the movie, like I'll be watching a movie and I'll think, no, it doesn't make any sense because that guy could not have known that. And I'm always like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Allow yourself to see these things. You are intelligent. I have to tell you that. You are a very sentient, intelligent being. I do not care what it says on your intelligence test. You have incredible intelligence as a human being. And this is one thing I really disagree with a lot of guys, is saying that women are not intelligent. We are all intelligent in various ways. Maybe we're intelligent in some intuitive way or some emotional way or understanding some other aspect of life. But this is all a form of intelligence. It's all an understanding, right, of how things work, or what you should respond. This is evolution. We evolved. Every single living thing evolved to become better at whatever it is doing, right? And that's like essentially a form of intelligence. It was not intelligent in the beginning. Single cell organisms are not intelligent, but as they became more and more complex, they become more intelligent. And some plants, even as they study plants, when a bug starts to eat them, under study, that the plant starts to release a poison to try to keep that bug from eating it. So even plants have defenses that kick in when the plant essentially hears itself being eaten. So I mean, that's how intelligent we are. People said, don't eat animals because they obviously feel pain. And I'm not saying this is not an argument for not eating plants, but I mean, it is interesting that the more we know, right? And we realize that plants also don't want to be eaten, is that essentially nothing wants to be destroyed. Humans do not want to be destroyed, killed. They do not want to be taken down. We want to all thrive and grow. I imagine myself as a tree, as a plant. Okay, this is how I see myself. And then somebody said, what do you want to do in your life? What is your goal? I said, listen, my goal is to grow as tall as I can. Because there's a limit. A tree can only grow so tall, and then the physics of it cause the branches to start bending over, or the branches break off because they're too heavy, right? So a tree, it can only grow so tall. Now you can make a building almost unlimited using new technologies, but a plant, a living thing, has limitations, right? So I realize we all have limitations, obviously physical limitations. And so what is my goal in life? Is my goal some specific thing, to achieve this, to have this kind of money, to have this many cars, or this much, children or houses, or to whatever, to have this many friends? And none of that stuff. I don't know what my specific goal is, but I know this. It's the way I think of myself. And if you think of yourself this way, it's quite freeing, actually. It's quite a nice feeling. And it opens you up. Imagine yourself with your hands in the air towards the sun. And your hands are leaves. Leaves essentially are like solar panels. They're collecting energy. The energy is coming through the body. Imagine yourself as a tree or a plant. And your job, and this is how I see myself, my job is to take the water as well as I can from the ground, which is essentially food and water and air, all of my nutrients, and also sunlight. There's other forms of nutrients. Take those nutrients and to grow as tall as I can, and to reach my branches out as far as they can, and my leaves to grow as green and thick as possible, and my roots to grow down deep into the earth, and the trunk of my body to be strong but very flexible, like a tree. So the wind comes and I bend, I don't break, but to grow as high as I possibly can in this life. This is my goal. And whatever that means, whether that's creation, whether that's money, whether that is whatever that is, children or teaching or happiness or discovery, all aspects of life, okay? A life is myriad of things, right? And there's many things I haven't even discovered that I want to do, right? That I'll find out. I'll say, I want to do this. I want to get good at that. Right? That's like another leaf, right? I want to grow, and I want to grow, and I want to grow as high as I can. And that is my goal. You ask me, what's my fucking goal? That is my goal. And I think a key aspect of that is my ability to imagine. because this will either incite or stop a lot of my ability to move forward. Because if you think that you know everything's been invented and you can't do it, and oh, it's all been done before, or I'm not an expert, I don't know, this will cause you to not be able to grow, and that muscle will not get stronger. Even if every idea you have is wrong, every fucking idea you ever have is always wrong. That's the wrong word, man. It's the wrong is the wrong word. Because each time you do this, you're getting stronger. Your shoulders are going back more. You're sitting up straighter. You know, every time you come up with an idea and you think of it, and then the reason why I think it's so important to say publicly. So, for example, what most wimpy guys do is they just keep everything secret. This is what everybody, okay, here's what you want to fucking avoid. And this is what most guys do, is they sit there, they don't say anything. And then when something happens, and I swear to God, you can see this all the time, guys will say, I knew that was going to happen. Oh, I knew he was going to win. I knew they're going to win. Brady, you can't stop him. You know, he's the greatest. You know, it's all these things. And and the reason why they can say these things so easily is because they never put their balls on the line and say things when they think them. And because they don't even think them, most people. They just, in a blur, in a fog, sitting around, and then things are happening to them and happening around them. And the most comfortable thing is to say, oh, yeah, because there is a kind of sense of humans that you did know that was going to happen. It's weird. Like you feel that way. But it's not true. The only way you can really make it true is by making a prediction publicly. Don't be afraid to predict things. Because this is it. Because when this is a form of imagination. When you predict something, so when you say, like what I said about the ultracapacitors, right? I'm putting my flag in the sand, okay? That this is what's going to happen. What Tesla's going to do with these things? The hybrid, the idea of charging the battery, the instant, the extra power for going up hills or whatever. And also, I'm going to say even one more thing. If this is what I think it is, if ultracapacitors are ready, as the hybrid was ready, the Toyota Prius made, and they're ready to supplement batteries, and it's basically essentially create instant charging in cars today, it's checkmate. So I'm going to make another prediction, is that companies that have been hesitating, hemming and hawing on electric, this is the type of thing that can put them out for good. Because then companies that are ahead with batteries and they're ahead with the ultracapacitors, there's no way they can catch up. This is my prediction. Now this one could definitely be wrong. But I just imagine, okay, you're like you have Ferrari, like for example. Now I don't know where Ferrari's at with their battery stuff, so I'm not saying Ferrari particularly, but I'm just saying, like, let's say an established, sports car like Ferrari. Let's say that they were not very advanced in battery, for example. Now, they could they get an idea, they got to make battery cars, and they hire all these battery guys, they get the batteries, they make the batteries, whatever, and then they have this super fast car that's super, they're going to be so far behind the fucking 8 ball, because instant charging is now a thing. And so cars that are behind and companies that are behind, they have so much to catch up, right? There's so much before the ultracapacitor. You have to understand so many things. Like the cooling system in a Tesla battery is incredibly complex and difficult to do. Batteries caught on fire before all the time, lithium batteries. The cooling system, and just even the cooling system inside the Tesla battery is incredibly complex, makes it a very formidable challenge for new competitors. Even though they opened up their patents to other companies, it's still very, very difficult to catch up with Tesla's battery. Do not underestimate a company's lead. This is one thing that people always do. They always think, the new guy it's going to be a new Google, a new Facebook. Entrenched leads are very difficult, very, very difficult to overcome. As Al Reese and Jack Trout said in their book, their marketing book, it was really worth reading. I can't remember the name of it. Search Al Reese and Jack Trout marketing, and they have one book that they wrote a lot of books, but there was one particular one that really went over this idea that The leader in something is very difficult to beat. And if you look at the leader in any industry, 100 years later, they're often still the leader for whatever reason. It's difficult. People thought that Microsoft was going to be, go bankrupt and be taken over, but they're so big. They have such a big lead. They have such a big installed base. Difficult to beat them. Skype, same thing. Tons of new Skypes out there, but Skype's got all those users. It's tough to beat. I'm not saying it can't be done. It can definitely happen. Plenty of examples. But the leader, don't underestimate the fucking power of the leader. It's not that easy. This is one thing when you're starting businesses, you got to come to reality quickly before you lose all your money. You have to realize that entrenched leads mean a lot, right? And companies that have battery technology, have experience making cars, have experience selling cars, and with engineers and like real world data, right, from their cars, like Tesla, they have a lead that will be not that easy to catch up with, actually. And now electric cars are very simple engineering wise. So this is one industry that can happen faster than, for example, with gasoline cars. It was incredibly difficult to catch up with the Japanese technology because of the engineering involved in internal combustion engines. But batteries and electronics, much less so. So it's less true. Still is true, though. Entrenched leads are serious. Data, accumulated consumer data, that is getting more and more valuable. They're saying now that the data from Uber, that you get from your car is more valuable. It's going to be more valuable than your car itself in the near future, which it might already be. Incredible. People are going to be buying and selling data, which is going to be making more money than car companies, right? Companies like Uber, companies like Didi Chuxing, Chinese one, Grab Taxi, these companies, right? So it's an incredibly complex, interesting world we live in. I think transportation and cars, self-driving, electronics, hydrogen, I think this is all very, 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 very interesting battery technology and a great fertile field for your imagination just to run wild and figure things out and think of things and plan things and just the exercise in itself. So if you listen to this podcast and you say, I think, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. This is not a place where you're going to be shamed on the Ronin Man channel. This is where it's okay. It is good to tap your intelligence and your imagination. And it's okay to be wrong. And it's, in fact, it's a sign it's a good. You're going to be wrong more than 50% of the time. Or like I said, you'd already be a billionaire in foreign exchange. So accept that, realize you're wrong most of the time. And that being said, don't let anybody shame you for being wrong, because the guys who are wrong the most are the ones that are going to win. Right? Because they're the ones that are trying. They're the ones who are going to create, right? My mind has gotten to the point where I can, if I want to write a book or I want to make a movie or I want to start a company, there's a lot of things I can do because your muscle gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And what was really interesting for me was the guys who came to the MGTOW World Summit were very high quality men, very interesting men. And really, they had, the guys, you guys that came, it was pretty damn impressive, I'll tell you. And I think that there is a community forming of intelligent men that are going to change the world. That's my opinion. Again, that's my prediction. I believe we're creating something very big here, and very, very powerful, and very, very positive too. Positive, right? I'd like to see, people become wealthy from their collaboration with other guys, and away from society. Like when you cut, essentially when you take the red pill, okay, like for lack of a better term, and when you come to grips with reality, it's difficult. It's a process. But then what happens is you find that you're pulling all these trailers you didn't even know, and there was like anvils in your trunk. Like I said that before, there was all these extra things weighing you down. As you discard these things, and as you feed your internal engine, you charge your internal ultracapacitor and battery, you become, slowly and slowly you get stronger and stronger and stronger. And you don't have these things holding you back. And now you're optimistic and you're free And you're like thinking, what can I do in this world? I could do this and I could do that. And let me try this. And I want to learn that. I want to learn this. I don't know why I want to learn this. I want to learn this. I think it's interesting. I think that it's just fucking interesting. And maybe it will lead to something. Maybe it won't. I don't know. But because I'm not wasting my time doing stupid things like watching Netflix all day, I have this energy to think of batteries. And I would love to come up with a new technology for batteries or for capacitors, for cars. I just love the whole process of creation along the way. You know, I love the whole process. And I can actually say that I actually love the way society's going. A lot of people say the world's getting terrible, blah, 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 blah. Opposite for me. When I was a kid, I was born in 1965. I'm telling you, the world was a much more rigid place back then. You had much less capacity to create a new business on your own with your own capital than you do today. Don't let anybody fucking tell you it was easy back then. There was entrenched interest everywhere. There was 3-inchers. There was fucking guys who would stop you. You were not a Harvard guy. I know because I didn't have that. I didn't have that good family. I had the trailer park background. And believe me, that held me back. People would be like, who are you? You know, like, where's your connections? You know, what's your credit? What's this? Where school did you go to? You know, this was like the big thing. And today, with the internet, is more and more. It's like, who are you, man? Not this other bullshit. Who's your family? You know, all this stuff. It's like, what is your idea? Even if you never had a good idea in your whole fucking life, ever, okay, you never had one goddamn good idea ever. Everything you ever said was wrong. You're just wrong about every goddamn thing you've ever been. You're not only wrong, but you're wrong like 100 times over. You know, just like, you know, wrong. And then you suddenly have, you know, you come up with one good idea. Let's say for, you know, to increase something in ultracapacitors or something. A company will buy that. A company will pay you, or your investors will give you money. You can do it. It's not about the wrong times. It's about the few right times. And accepting that you're not going to be right most of the time. But the thing is, man, you only need to be right a few fucking times in life to do very, very, very well. So accept being wrong most of the time. Let your imagination run. Think about things that you're not supposed to think about. You know, I mean, so many things that even women do. Like, for example, the tampons were invented by a man. Can you imagine that? Women had this period every day, every month, and they never invented a tampon, and some man thought of the idea of a tampon. You know, that's the kind of thing, man. Just think of things, man. It doesn't matter what the technology is. You can create something that will make you very, very wealthy and make your life very, very good. And don't let somebody, you know, say, oh, you're not a woman, you couldn't think of something for women. Of course you can think of something for women. Most of the things that women are using today were invented by a man. Now, I'm not saying that women did not create things. And the women who are listening, I know there's 7% women. You know, if you create something, you know, you have your own unique background and your own unique thinking. If you create something, this is it, man. I'm talking about fucking human potential, okay? Human fucking potential. A plant growing as high as you can, okay? Feeling the energy, sucking the things out of the earth, and growing as strong as you can, and as flexible as you can. That's what I'm talking about here. That's what I'm fucking talking about here, man. All right, guys. I hope you guys are having a good day, and I'm going to sign off here. So if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the little bell so you'll get the new videos. And let me know what you think about this episode, because this is obviously a little different, but this is very much me, and it's tied to who I am. It's tied to my whole thinking and the way that I live my life. So I thought this would be an important one. So I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, guys, have a good one. Thanks for listening.